Hello, good morning. Hello, welcome to this session on inclusive communication. Hello, good morning, welcome everybody, thank you. My name is Anna Trueng. I work as an advisor for the Director General for Communication at the European Parliament. My preferred pronoun is she, her. And before we get started, just some practical information. We have simultaneous interpretation between English and French. So if you prefer the language that's not spoken, you just put on the headphones and choose the right channel. This event is also being live streamed online. So hello to everybody who's following us from their screens. The whole session will last for an hour and a half. We will start with a brief introduction, and then each of the four speakers will have 5 minutes to do their presentation, and then we'll have a longer time slot allocated for questions and debate. For questions, we were thinking to use Slido. So please connect to Slido already. You see the address there on the screen, and when you are already in Slido, you select the session on inclusive communication, which is number 19. You're also free to use the hashtag, of course, EuropeCom for anything you post on social media. So let me just outline the topic of the session. I think that in recent years, as a EuropeCom community, we've made progress in terms of gender balance on panels. As event organizers, we've understood that it's not acceptable to present an all-male panel. And this year, and I believe last year's edition of EuropeCom as well, was pretty gender balanced in terms of speakers. This change, I would say, have been brought about not least because of public pressure. Organizations like the EU Panel Watch and the Brussels Binder have helped bring this change about. And they made it very obvious of the risks of offering an all-male photo opportunity, especially with social media. However, progress has been limited. EU Panel Watch report for last year still finds that only 34% of speakers at the Brussels events that were monitored were women, and all-male panels still make up 25% of all of the panels. So there is still a long way to go. And when it comes to race, only 1 in 7 speakers were of color. And less than 3% of all speakers were women of color. So in short, the gender gap is not the only gap in representation and visibility, and while women as a group is underrepresented, there are segments in that group that are far more underrepresented than others. And events with panel debates are not the only communication channel either. I think for the European institutions, the business case for inclusive communication seems quite straightforward. People who don't feel represented in our communication output are likely to think it simply doesn't concern them. And if we don't make this effort to be more inclusive, we will not reach out beyond the usual suspects, the people who are already informed about EU affairs, and the representation gap will only increase. It's a matter of democratic representativity and legitimacy to engage with diverse audiences. We need to strive to offer visibility and voice to diverse people, and we need to challenge stereotypes. At DG COM of the European Parliament, we had inclusive communication guidelines adopted earlier this year. There are some paper copies available here in the room for those of you who are interested afterwards. Just to say that these are very much homemade and it's work in progress. So we're by no means there yet, but we're starting to take small steps in the right direction, I believe. And moving on from the public institutions to the private sector, what are the motivations there? Is it simply about sales figures and accessing diverse consumers, or is it also about brand reputation? So these are some of the questions that we would like to explore here today with the speakers and with the audience. How can we as communicators redress the gender balance, not only at events, but also in other communication channels? How can we make our communication more inclusive and accessible? in the meaning of going further than just considering the binary gender aspect of men and women? How can communication support opening up to narratives that are not only the dominant, white, male, heteronormative, able-bodied narratives? What does inclusive communication mean? Who do we include when we speak of diverse audiences? LGBTI people, persons living with a disability, persons who for reason of age, race, religion, social or ethnic origin are identified as different from the dominant group in society? How can our communications address intersectionality? By intersectionality, we mean that many people have more than one identity trait, which can be the basis for discrimination, for example, gender and race. What are the challenges in addressing inclusion in our communication? How do we get it right? Now let me welcome and introduce the fantastic and diverse panel we have here today. I'll start with Sarah Halls from the UK, who is a segment producer at Bloomberg LP, a global leader in business and financial data, news and insights. Sarah works in the Europe, Middle East and Africa interviews team, where among other responsibilities, she books guests for interviews. In the past, she also worked as a photographer and videographer, so she holds expertise on how to approach gender and race in photography. And she is also one of the co-founders of the Brussels Binder, which was an initiative to push gender equality in EU policy debates. Sarah will speak to us on how to improve gender diversity and inclusion in imagery and audiovisual media. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Anna. And my preferred pronouns are she and her. So I thought I would take some time as well to explain what the role of a segment producer is, because we're really at the forefront of improving gender diversity and inclusion. So in addition to booking guests for our shows, I'm also obviously keeping abreast of what the daily news is. I'm looking ahead as well to seeing what is some of the things that will be in, for example, our economic calendars as well. And I think and I'm also pre-interviewing guests as well on a daily basis. And I think ultimately when we're looking at a guest, we're looking for somebody who has the expertise that our audience would be interested in. And we're looking for somebody who is the best editorial fit as well for that show, so that our audience is informed and they can take action on that information and then make those intellectual decisions that they'll need to do in their work. And so I think that really underscores the importance of improving gender diversity and inclusion, because it's important who reports, who edits, and who tells the story, but also equally who we pull that story from, who are the sources in which we're reaching out to for those stories. So in 2017, we identified that there was an issue. So at Bloomberg, we recognized the value in diversifying our sources. And that purple column represents that only 10% of our external sources were female. And this caused us to take practical steps to change. And we really decided to take a three-pronged approach, which was train, track, and build. In 2018, we launched the New Voices initiative, and that was with the aim to increase representation of women's sources in both online and on-air content. And one of the ways in which we did this is looking at the training side of things, is to provide 4 hours of one-to-one tuition to get those women TV ready, not only just for Bloomberg, but for when they want to appear on other outlets as well. And so by the end of 2019, we will have trained about 150 women globally, and already those women have appeared on TV over 193 times. And this is now rolled out over 8 cities, so that includes New York, London, Hong Kong, Dubai, and Mumbai. And I think this matters so much as well, because we want to get a fresh perspective. And when we get a fresh perspective, you get a new look on, or a new take rather, on the news, on that information. But it also gives us a competitive edge as well, and it keeps our audience engaged as well. So having that diverse group of sources, whether that means in terms of gender, sexual orientation, political association, ethnicity, and any other underrepresented voice, is imperative to ensuring fairness and balance in our coverage. We've taken these tangible steps to improve gender diversity and inclusion across all our platforms, whether it's with TikTok, which is one of our online or social media platforms, on air as well, whether that's TV or broadcast, or via the terminal, which is where people can get the news as well. It's a digital platform for us. So Bloomberg News' global database of women experts has grown more than tenfold since early 2018 to over 5,000 women. The percentage of women guests brought in as expert commentators on Bloomberg TV has climbed to over 21%. And we've recently released a new internal tool that aids our reporters when looking for untapped, diverse sources. So I've also talked about monitoring and tracking as well, because I think it's very important to have those metrics. And that's because it holds us accountable to what we're doing as well. And so that we can see where we've come from, where we started, we can look at our progress, and we can be ambitious about where we can go to as well in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing that. Now we have on my left Karim Deba, a media manager at the Belgian Union of Advertisers and vice president of Conseil de la Publicité in Belgium. Earlier this year, the Belgian Union of Advertisers published their charter on stereotype communication, which advocates for inclusiveness in advertising with regards to gender, origin, age, sexual orientation, disability, or convictions. Karim holds expertise in digital marketing, communication, and branding. And Karim will now speak on how the advertising industry is starting to pay attention to inclusive communication.
Thank you, Anna. So the Union of the Belgian Advertisers is just a small organization who represent the interest of the advertisers in Belgium. Je vais poursuivre en français.
I'm going to carry on in French in order to better express myself. So just a few facts about what's going on in Belgium. Marketing and communicators like to play with figures. Here, in a few facts, race, 20% of the Belgian population has origin outside Belgium. And we've lost the microphone, please. Microphone for the speaker. In terms of age, the age pyramid is reversing. In terms of sexual orientation, people now no longer are afraid to come out, and the community is more and more visible. And in terms of gender, women coming from highly skilled environments are more numerous than men. However, in commercial communication, and this was a study that was published by the Belgian Audiovisual Council, the majority of what we see on the screen and posters or in digital ads are white people, fairly young, usually heterosexual, and generally male. Now, when we talk about advertising, those who work in the restrictive advertiser scenario, they say, I've got 20 seconds to communicate a message, put one poster to communicate the information on my product, so I don't have a lot of time. So the use of stereotypes is almost a reflex that comes from the 30s, 40s, or 50s. So what can we do now to have this change in terms of communication in Belgium? First of all, everything that has to do with international initiatives, for example, the World Federation of Advertisers, there are many initiatives taken into account, and as soon as we receive them, we look at whether this could work on the Belgian market, and then we set them up. In terms of self-regulation, we're also members of the Council of Publicity, which has a legal body which deals with all complaints about ads in Belgium which appear. In terms of regulation, we also support the High Council on Audiovisual, which is the Belgian body dealing with communications. And we have our own local initiatives. We organize ethno-marketing sessions. We have an annual event which is totally devoted to inclusion. We organize meetings between CEOs of the major advertisers to discuss this type of problem and see how in future we can make advertising more representative of the population in Belgium. We also have a responsible communication charter based on an international initiative. And since this year, we are members of the United Nations Women as a privileged partner on this subject. Now, why are we doing this? Well, advertising has a social role to play now. That's been proven. Multiculturality and all of the aspects we've been talking about are now a daily fact. And advertisers and trademark holders are not philanthropic in their nature. Being inclusive also means an increase in business. Nonetheless, despite all of that, there are things which are still totally unacceptable, which do take place within Belgium. This advertisement appeared only a few hours on Facebook, generated an unprecedented wave of indignation, and we're obviously against this as well. Fortunately, there are also good examples we can show. There's not just this type of ads. This came from, there are ads from IKEA, Unilever, or others that have already used inclusion as one of their major pillars of communication. What's left to do? Well, we need to work on a better advertising ecosystem in Belgium. How? Well, by educating the advertisers, monitoring what's happening, trying to reconcile what's happening with what should happen, and possibly sanctions if necessary. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Karim, and thank you, Sarah, also for these two contributions from the private sector. Now let's move on to Celine here on my right. Celine is based in Brussels. She's the head of Civic Engagement Department of the African Diaspora Youth Forum in Europe. She ran a Bring Out the Vote campaign targeting the diaspora in Belgium and France ahead of the 2019 European elections using peer-to-peer education. Before that, she was Secretary General at the African, Caribbean and Pacific Young Professionals Network, where she specialized in the Sustainable Development Goal 5, which is to achieve gender equality. Celine will speak to us about the experience of campaigning to encourage the African youth diaspora to vote in the European elections. The floor is yours.
Thank you. How does this work?
Sorry, there seems to be an issue with the PowerPoint presentation, so we will move on to, we'll just sweep the order of the speakers. So I will invite André Felix to speak. He's an external communication coordinator at the European Disability Forum, a civil society organization which defends the rights of over 100 million people with disabilities living in Europe. Nothing about us without us is their motto. André used to be a trainee at the DG Com of the European Commission. So he's familiar with the institutions and he holds expertise in the field of accessible communication. Please, André.
So, hello everyone. Just to start, my preferred pronouns are he and him. As Anna said, we represent, the European Disability Forum represents over 100 million persons with disabilities in Europe. So this is over 15% of the population. And our motto is indeed, taking on also the other presentation, nothing about us without us. It's 100 million people that should be included and that should have access to everyone's communication. Voilà. And why should we have access to everyone's communication? So the first reason is because it's the right thing to do. It's 100 million people that should have equal access. The second reason, especially for national governments, regions, cities, and even EU institutions, it's because all the EU countries and the European Union itself as an integration organization, as we call it, ratified this document that is on my screen, on the screen, called the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And this means that they have binding obligations, including the EU institutions, so it's not just something for the countries, binding obligations to make communications accessible and to make communications inclusive of persons with disabilities. And the third reason is also, especially for the business, money. A study in the UK called the Purple Pound showed that businesses lose 24 billion euros a year, 20 billion pounds a year, sorry, 24 billion pounds a year because they are not accessible for customers with disabilities, and 11 pounds a year, 11 billion pounds a year, 11 billion is just because people don't have access to the websites, because the websites are not accessible to persons with disabilities. So this is why I'm here to argue for an inclusive communication that is accessible for persons with disabilities, but also that includes persons with disabilities. And how to do that? I'm bringing 3 topics. So accessibility, but also representation and participation. On accessibility, I want to showcase 2 of our recent publications. So the How to Make Your Elections campaign accessible, which we did for the European elections, and the EDF Guide for Accessible Meetings. You can access them at bit.ly/accessible campaigns and at bit.ly/EU accessible meetings. And this shows there is still a long way to go in terms of accessibility, even in Brussels. And for example, in terms of meetings, you can see everything that can be done. But some things that are that we argue for is, for example, when you have the registration, you should have a question asking for accessibility requirements, so that persons with disabilities can tell you what they need. So sometimes it's something as simple as more time when they need to talk, if they are speakers. Sometimes it's something that is also very useful for persons without disabilities, like this live captioning system that you can see on the photo below. This is a system where people, where you have 1 or 2 persons typing everything that I say. And this is useful, of course, for deaf and hard of hearing people. It's essential for them, but it's also useful for all of us, because sometimes we are not paying attention. It happens, especially when it's 2 days of conference. And if you miss the beginning of a sentence, then you don't really understand what's happening. So this is also useful for all of us. Other things in accessibility, you can read everything, and I will not speak about everything, but there are also other things that are useful for, essential for persons with disabilities, but also very useful for all of us. Subtitling in video is something that we really argue for, because it's essential for deaf and hard of hearing people, but also if you're in the train, if you're trying to watch a video without headphones and you are in a public space, you cannot really put the sound. And something else, because I was in the session for podcasts and I saw it was really full, something that was talked about is transcriptions. And transcriptions are essential for deaf and hard of hearing people, of course, but they're also very useful for Google. Google when we met them, they said, yes, transcriptions is like something why people don't do it, because our search engines is gonna, they are not gonna crawl the audio, they are gonna crawl the text that you have. So accessibility, and accessibility for persons with disabilities is useful for everyone. Second thing is representation, as was already mentioned here. Right now, I was listening to Anna speak about the number of women and persons of ethnic minorities speaking in panels. We don't even have these data for persons with disabilities because it's so rare. The stories that we hear in the media and even more often in advertisement for persons with disabilities are stories that are patronizing and stereotypical. For sure you already saw these stories where it's not about the person with disability, it's about how people help them overcome their disability. And overcoming their disability is something that is really wrong to say, because people are not disabled because of themselves, they are disabled because of the society. So something that happens a lot is that stories of persons with disability, when they appear, they are just used to make persons without disability feeling inspired or feeling better or being like their fairy godmothers. And I'm just going to quote a very good TV show that does not do this and that explains this very succinctly, called Speechless, which say that the stories of persons with disability portray them either as one-dimensional saints who only exist to warm the hearts and open minds of able-bodied people, or as cautionary tales to say, for example, and I'm sure you already saw, where, oh, I'm in a wheelchair because I was driving so fast, so if you don't want to be like me, don't drive too fast. And this is really not helpful for persons with disabilities. What is helpful is talking about the problems that exist in the society. Why did we have to do a fundraising for a wheelchair? Because the states and the government is not giving enough money for the persons with disabilities. Why did someone have to carry this person in a wheelchair over a flight of stairs? Because the hotel didn't have an elevator or a ramp. And why do these stories happen, and why are these stories still so common? And here I'm touching on the points that were already touched. It's because there is no participation. So why persons with disability are still not included in the labor market? They are still not consulted when doing campaigns. They are still not able to have their voice or to be present in things that are not related to disability. The next 3rd of December, for example, is the International Day of Persons with Disability. And yes, then we receive a lot of messages saying, yes, we're gonna do something about disability. And this is a bit bittersweet because persons with disability don't exist only on the 3rd of December. They exist over 365 days a year, or 66 if it's a leap year. So they should be included, and they should be included not because they have a disability, but because they are part of the society. And I think I'm running a bit too long, so I will just pass to the end. So if you have a campaign, just think about including persons with disabilities. Representation is still very rare. So what I recommend is that you incorporate our motto, "Nothing about us without us," in your communications. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Andre. Now I hope we have Celine's PowerPoint presentation. In a minute, okay, no worries. Keep your questions coming on Slido. Have you managed to connect to Slido and find the right session? I can see there are 2 questions. We'll take all the questions at the end, but I hope that you have more things that you wonder about, how you can improve the inclusiveness of your communication, or any other question you want to ask any of the speakers on the panel to get the debate started. Okay, I think the presentation should be up and coming. Anyway, I'll start with the introduction of Celine. Celine Fabriquet is based in Brussels. She's the head of the Civic Engagement Department of the African Diaspora Youth Forum, as I said, and she's going to talk to us about the campaign that she ran to bring out the vote in the African diaspora in Belgium and France ahead of the European elections. Thank you.
Here we go. So thank you very much. Welcome, everyone. And you know, the motto, "Nothing for us without us," is also our motto. I'm part of the youth organization, and, we promote the diaspora in Europe. So we launched a program related to political representation of the youth of this diaspora, which made the starting point of our initiative, which is called Diaspora Vote. So Diaspora Vote is just it's the conclusion of a very, very long frustration with the European institution. So it's the frustration of trying to explain the term intersectionality and not finding hearers or people looking at you like, what are you talking to me about? It's also, for us, it was a way not only to explain to the diaspora that they are part of the European Union, that they are citizens and they have the right to vote, but also to explain to the European Union that his citizens don't look the same, that they are as diverse. And so they should also make effort to talk to them. So after 8 months, almost no funding, yeah, the youth were really good with no money. We did one training of 10 young people, 5 from France, 5 from Belgium. We had 13 video, 10 minutes européennes, which is like a capsule which explain in 1-2 minutes what's the EU, different elements, the Parliament, the Commission, because we really wanted to make sure that even if you don't have the time, then in 1-2 minutes, when you take your public transport to go to work, you can listen to this. You can understand it in a plain, simple language. And we also had 7 live shows, Ma Vie Citoyenne, where I was presenting, and we brought on this show, we were talking with like candidates, because for me, as somebody who votes, I wanted to know, well, if I'm going to vote for you, like, do you know how the EU works? Like, do you understand how much you can do and what you can't do? And so I wanted also to show that to the citizens, to make them understand that, yes, sometimes the EU is dysfunctional, sometimes it doesn't work, but sometimes it works really well. But it works really well when our representatives know how to use the EU and understand how it works. And we also did 7 events, Diaspora Vote, where we brought together, again, the institution. We brought the institution. I don't know if some of you know France, and Trappes is one of the suburban area of France who has maybe 80% of people of color that are living there. So we brought the European Commission, the Council, the European Parliament there for a discussion and exchange with the citizens of that city. And one of the things that the Commission and the Parliament always said to me was like, yeah, we never come here. I'm like, of course you don't. And that's the problem. You need to go to those places. You need to stop staying in the big city center. So I hope that the upcoming commission, as they say, they are going to fly around the entire 28 countries, that they will go outside of the big city, go to the rural area and the suburban area. And so what did this campaign conclude? So we had 2 conclusions. And we're really happy about it. So that's 16 European MEP with African descent background, but a total of 30 people of color in the European Parliament now, which is double what was it before. But it also shows that when you go outside of your comfort zone, when you go and talk to the people directly and listen to them, they come and, they show up at the polls. So 50% of EU citizens went to the polls. So I think that's something like to remember. What are the challenges for inclusive communication for a youth organization like us? It's the funding, the media visibility. It was so hard to get the visibility in media, to go into TV show. We've sent so many information requests to say, well, we have this initiative, this project. We'd like to have like 2 minutes to present it, to tell, oh, we have this event happening. Please, could you come and cover this event? The social media also, and the hate speech in the social media makes it very difficult for us to showcase the initiative that we're doing, because we are not the loudest. Because we're not the loudest, then we're not being seen. Because we don't maybe attract the most like, because we don't say controversial elements, then we're not being seen or we're not being supported. So one of the solutions is what we want is the EU institution to ask themselves, when is the last time I spoke with local minority representative? How to maintain intersectionality when I do not have diversity among my staffs? Are the words I'm using understandable to everyday citizens, those living outside the capital, those without an interest or education on politics or the EU? The media should ask themselves, are we impartial? Are we making sure that the loudest are not the only one being heard? Are we spreading hate by repeating and diffusing hate message by either political leaders or individuals? And you should also ask yourself, and I always ask that myself, am I the right person to bring that message? The reason why I said that is that Diaspora Vote, the reason why we did a training of 10 young people, it's because, yes, I'm a POC, but my social economic situation is not the same as a POC who lives in Trappes. I did not feel like I had the right or the understanding on the ground to be able to go and speak to them about the European Union with the language that they could understand. So us bringing young people here, training them, explaining it to them so that they can make up their own mind, but also then going back home to explain with their own words, with their own understanding what the EU is and what's the importance of it. So this is also something very important, always asking yourself, am I the right person to bring that message? So to conclude, for me, to be inclusive is to develop communication content or communicating and always remembering that EU citizens are diverse. Diverse beyond gender, beyond language and countries. That inclusive communication must take race and social economic status into consideration. Inclusive communication is also about the image, the picture and people that you use to convey your various messages. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That was very interesting and enlightening for all of us, I think. There are many things in there about frustration, about the importance of participation, about language, and I think that we have quite some obstacles to overcome as EU communicators. Would anyone like to start asking a question? Otherwise, I will just transfer the questions from Slido to our speakers. A question to Karim, Deba. How can we know if big corporations communicate inclusively in order to shape their image or because they believe in those values?
Ben, tout comme on a du greenwashing.
Well, there is greenwashing when it comes to communication about more environmental products. We also have to be careful that purpose marketing, as it's called, doesn't become inclusive washing. Nothing's certain when it comes to brands, but they do their very best to please their target audience. Should we pay more attention to this? Yes, because this is on the agenda for those in charge of all of the major brands, so we have to keep this under surveillance.
Maybe it's also the purpose of a company to gain money, so if it can be combined, is it so bad?
Absolument pas.
Definitely not. We could, of course, push ahead with objectives which are business objectives and other objectives which are more societal. The current trend is for there to be more societal responsibility in our communities in general. People are going out into the streets to demand certain things. Really, there is a trend now where the general public is taking more and more power. And look at what happened with Vicky Berger. If things do something silly, it takes on immense proportions. This does have an impact on businesses, both positive and negative. Everything depends on the products, on how products are presented, but also what companies do when there is a crisis. this is a subject which we are being more and more vigilant about. Thank you.
We have another question here. How can we irrefutably respond to arguments that states supporting representation is an artificial and unfair push? Pink quotas, racial quotas, etc. This is for the whole panel.
Let's start. Regarding quota, even within the POC, we always discuss, like, is it important? Should we have quotas? My personal opinion is yes, you need quotas. Because if it doesn't come naturally, you need quotas. It's like until it comes naturally, until we don't think about it anymore, until we don't have to highlight the fact that, oh, this is a diverse panel. Like, until that, then you need quotas. It's not wrong. I mean, in France, they have implemented, there's a legislation on quota for people with disability in regards to employment. And I don't know the outcome, but I think it's been really working really hard, like well. So we need it. That will be my input.
And I think it also points to what I was saying previously as well about metrics. If you don't have those metrics, how do you identify that there might be an issue? If you can't identify or quantify something somehow, then you can't go about making those steps to address that issue as well. So I think it's really important to have those metrics there and that they're available and publicly available as well.
Yes, picking on the point of view of disability, there's also a discussion on this, but our view and my personal view is that it comes from two ways. As I said in my presentation, things only change when people are in the room, when people are working. And quotas is the best and quickest way to do that. Quotas have, if well implemented, and that's another discussion, have force companies and force businesses to make reasonable adjustments for accessibility so that it's easier for other people for persons with disabilities to join. And when this push starts, then it's easier for minorities, for disadvantaged groups to enter. And the second point, and this is my personal view, quotas, and there is always this pushback. Quotas is about discriminating against white, able-bodied, heterosexual persons, but it's not. The society discriminates against persons that are not white, male, able-bodied, heteronormative persons. It's about correcting the injustice that there is in the society. It's about creating an equal playing field. And this is the fact that persons don't see it like this. It also speaks to their privilege, to the fact that they never had problems in entering the labor market. So I think this is sometimes the argument that I would give.
Thank you, Andre, for pointing that out, because I think it's very obvious that those of us who are privileged, we don't necessarily recognize and see that privilege. And if we think that the status quo is neutral, we're wrong, because there are structural injustices, structural discrimination, hurdles for certain individuals to reach to certain positions. And quotas is just one small, well, not small, but is one tool or one way to try to fix the system, and maybe we have to do rather more than less to fix the system. I hear also a lot about training women, training different individuals from different communities to be able to fit in the system as it is, but maybe we should fix the system to make it everyone be able to unleash their potential within the system, rather than having to try to fit into something which was actually created by one dominant group, so white men of a certain age and a certain education level, and instead change the system in its whole. But let's move on to a question that is gaining traction here. The audience would like to know if you have any campaigns that can be seen as best practice in terms of inclusive communication.
En Belgique, on a eu
In Belgium, we've had a lot of examples. Volvo, for instance, put into place a radio campaign a few months ago to launch their new model. And they talked about the family They said that the family was no longer a woman and a man. It could be two women, two men. It could be a single-parent family. It could be a step-family. In another instance, Dove used women in an advertising campaign who were not of the usual shape of women that you see in adverts. And also, there was another instance where furniture was being advertised, but for all kinds of couples, and there were LGBT couples in those adverts as well. So we have been seeing such campaigns over a number of years, and we hope to see them more and more in the next few months and years. Thank you.
So, not like I don't want to look like a sucker, but regarding like inclusive communication in terms of like political engagement, I felt like this time around, the European Parliament did very well. Their video, for me, like, you have no idea. So when I came into, like, you know, in front of the European Parliament, there's always like different pictures. So I came in the European Parliament and I looked up and I saw myself. I saw somebody that looked like me. So that, I feel like this made me feel even more part of the European Union. And then when they launched their campaign video, there were diverse people in the video. So I think this is what it is, like making sure like the diversity is there. So I would say kudos to the Parliament for that. They did very well. And so, yeah.
Yeah, I want to add to Céline that indeed this Time I'm Voting campaign, I think it was a very good example of inclusive communication. It also included persons with disabilities, which were very happy, and especially they reached out to, I don't know if they reached out to you, but they reached out to us to know how to do it. And this is really something very important. Like, we are here, we want to be heard, so just reach out to us if you don't know how to do it. We actually do know how to do it. So this was very good, and this Time I'm Voting was a really good campaign.
Wow, thank you for that. A question to Sarah. How can we address the issue of some broadcasters inviting women of color or trans people to their debates on their identity rather than on their expertise?
Yeah, I think it's a very important question as well, actually. I think it's sort of, when you're in these spaces where certain voices don't often get heard, I think sometimes people feel like it's a first step, and so they have to open up the platform, and therefore you're only asking people to report on or to talk about one specific issue. And I think maybe that's like a good first step, but then I think it's also important to engage with those producers as well, and to talk with them about the other stories as well that are available, that are possible for them to talk about as well, that aren't just focused on the fact that someone might be an underrepresented voice or a minority as well. Because unless we also have to do this, like, I would call it a pushback as well, to say like, hey, you know, we can talk about other issues. It's very easy to then become categorized and to be pigeonholed to talk about one specific issue.
Coming back to that, I think it happens also for binary gender, for men and women. If you, in the EU Panel Watch report for 2018, remove the panel debates that were about gender and women's rights, you have a far lower participation of women speakers. So it's something that has to happen across the board for all the minorities, which, by the way, if we add up all these minorities, we are clearly the majority of the population. If you start off with women, it's 51% of the European population, and we have significant groups of other minorities, so maybe we should start speaking about overrepresentation of a certain group rather than underrepresentation of certain groups.
Can I add something on this? So us, something we've done because of especially this type of issue that happens a lot. We have Ma Vie Citoyenne Europe, which is a web TV that we have once a month. And when we discuss with people of the European Parliament, like POC members of the European Parliament, and we talked about, I don't talk about their anything else, like we talk about their work, what they are doing, what they are not doing, we call them out. And this is also, I think this is also taking a different approach. This is what we've done so far. So I don't know, have a look and please give us some feedbacks.
Something else as well. I think it's also important when reaching out to producers and to anyone who might be booking a guest, or even to journalists who are looking to report on stories, it's okay to send like a short list of people, of women, or of whatever underrepresented voice, or in cases might be more of a sort of sizable minority as well, in the case that you just gave as well. So that people can see that, well, look, here's somebody who is a woman, but they can also speak on political debates regarding social health care, for example, regarding business and finance, if we're looking at the case of Bloomberg as well. And that way you start to shift those perceptions that, okay, we can only have a story. If we're looking for a story, and these stories can only focus on X person, and this X person looks this way, then we decide to reach out to them only. I think we also have to be proactive as well on the other side to do what we can to reach out to the producers. And a lot of the times you'll hear that people are quite, in media, that journalists are quite time poor. And so in any way you can make it more convenient for them, that also helps with the reporting as well, and helps with increasing quality of reporting as well. So I think it's really important that it works on both sides to reach out to each other.
Here is another question which is relating to the same thing. Do we ever see a story with a person with a disability that's not about the disability? Often with people of color, women, and seldomly with LGBTI, focus on the difference.
But I have a very short. I was looking at this question and really thinking, but I do not remember anything. Especially when persons have visible disabilities, the story ends up being about this, and this is something that we at the European Disability Forum are working on the intersectionality, on the fact that persons with disabilities, they have also suffer from multiple discrimination if they are women, if they are LGBTI, if they're from ethnic minorities. So if you find someone, just feel free to send me by Twitter.
Okay, so for me, the problem is not the difference. So no, I don't want to stop with the difference. I'm different and I'm happy to be different. I'm black. You can't, I'm not going to be white just because you don't want to see it. I'm going to stay like this. It's up to, the problem is not the difference. It's the problem that we create a problem because of the difference. We discriminate because of the difference. The problem is not the difference. So I don't agree. I'm sorry for the person who asked this question, but stop the difference? No, continue the difference. Highlight the difference. Thank you.
Si je peux enchaîner là-dessus.
If I can just pick up on that, I agree fully with that, because talking about difference, pointing out difference, is highlighting it. In an advert, either you go for the biggest number and you include everyone, or you don't manage to do that. In advertising agencies, creative agencies, work is very complex, but nevertheless, it's not impossible to pull this off.
Thank you. How do we bridge the gap between cities with environments of highly educated and well-paid professionals and rural districts with elderly people and non-academic jobs? This is a question, I think, which links into what you were addressing, Celine. It's about the language. Do we speak so that people understand what we're saying? And it kind of, you already addressed a little bit this gap between the big city and the suburban areas or the rural areas. Is there anyone who wants to develop further on this?
I can give my own opinion. Yes, there is a difference on how people especially on big cities, even if persons with disabilities are always discriminated, there is especially a difference with access to services. And I think this comes a bit more, I'm not a cohesion policy expert, but this comes from the fact that rural areas are poorer, are less served. So, I mean, my answer is give these rural areas more money, invest on education, invest on employment, invest on making it as highly educated and well paid as the cities. I think that's what I would say.
The advice for me is I always when I talk to the EU, when I talk about the EU to my family, that's when I understand that I need to work more on inclusive communication, on the words that I'm using. Because when they look at me like, what are you talking about? Like, what is this? Then that means I need to work. So my advice for each of you is talk to your family and see if they understand what you're talking about.
Thank you. Then we have an anonymous person asking whether this topic is sufficiently embedded in future communicators' curriculum. Are they triggered to ask themselves the right questions? Are we asking ourselves the right questions? Maybe having a more diverse set of staff in the communication departments will help us ask the right questions or bring the right issues up or increase our sensitivity to these issues. Do you have other ideas?
I mean, my answer is again no. I studied marketing and communications, now 5 years ago, so maybe things changed, but I never had a topic on inclusion, on how to prepare ads that related to diversity. I also didn't have a topic on how to ensure that the communication I'm making is accessible for persons with disabilities. And this is something that we are pushing for universities to include in the curriculum. It doesn't take much time, but it should be a model in every area, every studies that would maybe end in communication. So also in website development, although this more technical AI development, which is riddled with bias. AI developers are recreating the bias of the societies. So it should be in the universities. They should study this.
Here is another question for you, Andre. How can we make content accessible for disabled people on a budget, on a reduced budget, and in short time for small NGOs with little capacity?
Okay, this is a great question, but I'll try to be brief because I could talk. So, just to start, the European Disability Forum, the communications team is 2 people now, and it was 1 person just until March. So we are a small NGO. We have a limited budget, but we still manage to make things accessible. Most of the things, what I would recommend, what I also always recommend, is to start by these things. You can, from now on, start adding image description or alternative text on Twitter images. You can, from now on, it's very easy through YouTube to add subtitles. It doesn't take that long. Maybe the first time it takes longer, but with automatic generation captions, it doesn't take that long. And then the third thing is, as I said, ask the persons with disabilities. So, for example, to be honest, if you have a meeting and you have registrations and you do see that there is no deaf person or no person that needs a live caption or sign interpretation, and you are not web streaming it, because that's another question. You don't need live captioning and you don't need sign language interpretation. And actually, a very good example, I don't see anyone in the room, is from ILGA Europe, the LGBTI association. They are organizing a meeting with persons with disabilities. They also have a small staff, and they are just asking the person what do they need for the meeting. And then they either ask us, they either check online or ask us, or they ask the person, okay, how can we better accommodate you? Because for the persons that need accommodation, that need accessibility requirements, it's not the first time that they will need these accessibility requirements. They know how this works. They can give some solutions, they can give some input. So just don't be afraid to ask. They will be happy that you ask. They will not be complaining about you needing to ask. So I think that's it. There are easy things to do that you can do right now, live image description, subtitling, and also asking for persons with disabilities what do they actually need and how can you better provide this. Hope it answered the question.
Do we have anyone wanting to ask questions in the room? Please, go ahead. Just press the button.
Would the speaker use a different microphone, please?
Thank you. Do we have any other questions or comments from the audience, please?
Hi, I've got a couple of questions. Firstly, for the gentleman from the Belgian Advertising Agency, you spoke quite a lot about including more people of colour or women in the adverts. Do you have any set measures that you're taking to... C'est mieux en français, peut-être? D'accord. En fait, j'ai dit que dans votre présentation,
In your presentation, you talked about people of colour and women appearing in adverts. Do you have any specific measures to include more people with disabilities in your adverts?
sorry, was for Mr. Felix. I'm actually type 1 diabetic and bipolar, so I've got invisible disabilities. You've spoken a lot about physical disabilities and supporting people with those physical disabilities. I actually came and spoke to your organisation, to your colleague, in about February, March, about volunteering with you a bit. And also, she said you'd be organising lots of events in Brussels. I haven't heard about any events. I was wondering, obviously I live and work in Brussels, so I'm more concerned about everything here, but on the wider scale across Europe, how are you working to support people with invisible disabilities and in particular mental health? Because I think that's a real hot topic these days that we haven't really touched on. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you for your question. I don't have any figures, but the Superior Board of Advertising in Belgium does have measures for all kinds of inclusion, not just gender, LGBTI and disabilities. Certainly, disabled persons and people with reduced mobility are all included as well, but I don't have any figures. And now, of course, we have to translate that into actual representations in the next few years.
Regarding visible disabilities, yes, I recognize indeed my examples were based on visible disabilities, and this is a problem in communication as well, that when people communicate or include persons with disabilities, they also tend to go for the visible disability. But this was my mistake and it should not happen, and invisible disabilities are actually extremely important. If they are underdiagnosed, but they may be the most part of the 100 million persons. we work with. We are working more on persons with mental health issues, on persons also with intellectual disabilities and psychosocial disabilities. In regards to the communication, we try to, in terms of including persons that visibly they do not have a disability. So like, to be honest, if I have to put a photo, and of course some people come and say, when you complain that there's no person with disability, they say, oh, but they have invisible disabilities. But yes, then mention it or make it seen. But stories should include this. Mental health issues are something that are gaining a lot of traction. We work with our member Mental Health Europe a lot on it. I then can explain you all the political advances that we're doing on it. But in terms of communication, it's also good to remember many people have invisible disabilities. This changes the way they are treated in society, and they should also be included, especially through stories, through telling their stories, and through seeing how their stories affect their interaction with your service, with your product, with your institution, with your NGO. For the second question regarding the events, I will add you to our newsletter, and then you can receive all our events.
Hello, my name is Dumitru. I'm a content producer, and I was born and raised in Moldova, where we have a 9 to 15% of Russian-speaking minority, and we, the natives, the locals, we always pretend them to speak the local language, which is the official language, because Russian is not, and they always claim that they had no chance to learn it and they had no reason to learn it, and that's why they don't speak, and quite often they claim us to speak Russian. And then for 2 years now I live in Brussels, and I'm part of the second biggest minority in Brussels, which is Romanians, and there is no communication for us special, and there is no tentative from the administration to integrate us somehow in the life of the community. And my question is, where do we find this golden middle, not to replace the inclusive communication with the integration? How do we make sure that people get the message, get involved in the society, but still they keep their own identity, and they still feel that they are different, as you claimed before? How to make sure not replacing inclusive communication with the integration?
Thank you very much. Before asking who would like to take this, I think also every individual can be allowed to have several. I mean, we don't have to choose one identity. You can be Moldovan and Romanian and Bruxellois. Yeah, who would like to take the question?
Yeah, as Anna said, I mean, look at me. I am multiple things. I am French. I am from Burgundy, so I love wine and snails. I am also Cameroonian. I am European. I am African. I am a woman. I am young. I mean, I am everything like this, and I love all of it. So I don't think it's one or the other. I don't think it's being inclusive doesn't go against the integration. No. I think the more inclusive you are, the easier it will be for people to integrate, because they'll feel like, okay, well, they are reaching out to me, they want me, they look at me, they care for me. So, and it's the same for you. Like, I would say, when I'm in Belgium, like now I want to speak, also learn to speak Flemish, because I speak French. I'm like, oh, I don't need to speak Flemish, but I should try. So I could ask you the same. How many of you who here speak Flemish or French? I mean, I know a lot of people that are here, and none of them even speak French or Flemish, and they can still go by because Brussels make it happen like that.
Là, je vais pas parler au nom de la.
Well, I'm not going to talk now on behalf of the advertising sector as such. The borderline between integration and inclusion is something very distinct for me. Sometimes we can talk about assimilation. My mother is Dutch and my father's Algerian, but I'm Belgian. I did my military service in Belgium. I regard myself as a European citizen, a citizen of the world. I speak Dutch. You heard my English just before, so I'll not say much about that. I speak Dutch and French fluently. I, of course, suffered from racism in my youth, being in a school in the Brussels region. Integration is different to inclusive communication. Let's put integration to one side and let's continue working together so that these differences that some people want to emphasize are the right differences to highlight. We shouldn't flatten who we are and where we come from and where we're going.
Links in nicely with the question, is non-inclusiveness the same thing as discrimination?
It's a form.
Yes, is the question here, is the answer here. Do you want to develop, Celine?
It is a form of discrimination. I mean, I don't know. I mean, if you don't so discrimination is it's like a very big word and it means a lot of things, but I think if you don't attempt to include people, sometimes people don't even do it on purpose, like they just don't think about it, like thinking about like, oh, let's have a woman panel. And I've asked sometimes, like, why don't you have women in panels? They're like, oh, but I don't know any woman. I didn't think about it. So it's things like, and so, yeah, I will say it is a form of discrimination.
I would add to that, it's a form of discrimination because it includes individuals and groups. So it's discriminating against those groups. If it's non-inclusive, if it's perceived by a dominant group for a dominant group, it means that you're excluding somebody. So we cannot be united in diversity, which is one of the EU motto, is one of the founding values, if we leave people outside of that, I think.
I just wanted to add to this and to what Celine said, especially because in terms of non-inclusive, it also fuels the other discriminations. So if you don't have persons with disability, black persons in the room, you will not think about their needs. So we get a lot of things in the disability world where we ask, so will you have interpretation, sign language interpretation? And they say no, because we didn't think about it. We didn't think it would be needed. And the people don't think it's needed, and it's a legitimate. It happens a lot. It's not because people hate persons with disabilities, or it's not because people don't consider them important. It's because they are not in the room, so they are not considered. So non-inclusive leads to more discrimination in the end.
We have an interesting question here about organizational culture. How would you on the panel advise speaking about discrimination inside your organization while making sure that you don't get targeted from superiors about disrupting order?
Taking that one on. I think it's very important to find communities within your organization who would support views in order to create an inclusive workforce or an inclusive team. I think it's important, we use the word ally, and what does that mean? But I think it's extremely important to also find your allies in the workplace as well. And with that, then you can go to, then you look at what your chain of command, so to speak, and you could go to HR, maybe you need to take it up with one of your supervisors as well. I think you have to use the channels that exist, and hopefully they do exist in your organization, but also go with the support of other people, because I think something that I feel is highlighted in whether you're coming from the corporate sector or whether it's more on the NGO side of things, is the solidarity and, you know, between the different minorities or underrepresented voices. And if you don't have that solidarity, you can't really address issues of intersectionality or anything like that. So yeah, I truly do believe that you do need to find other people with where you work who can help you and who you can talk with, but beyond just talking about it, finding out how to change it. And one way to do that is through going through the channels that exist, the structures that exist in your workplace.
Yeah, to add to that, the reality is also that sometimes there are no structures in your workplace. And first, I want to underline what Sarah said, that often, this is a personal opinion, but often it seems that the different kinds of minorities don't work together. And this is something that at TDF we really don't want to happen. So we are really working together at the European level, but it should also happen at personal level. Like if you're LGBTI, you kind of have a responsibility also to support other minorities, because you are discriminated against by a patriarchal system, and they are the root. It's the root of the problem. So you need to find indeed allies also in other discriminated groups, also with people that think like you. But if you don't have those, it's tricky. It's tricky, and it's not a 100% sure way that you don't get retaliation. But in every country in the EU, there is an equality body in charge of discrimination issues. There is directives on employment, so you can contact them. That's one way. Some places you can contact them anonymous, some not. But if you don't feel support in the workplace, you can contact the equality body. They normally know of associations like ours where you can then get peer support from outside the network and try to prepare something. But I mean, I admit it's tricky and it's not a fireproof solution.
Me, I'm part of a POC group, which was put together by ENAR. And it's a WhatsApp group, and I think for me it's a great support system. There's about 60 people there working from different backgrounds. So, and it's a good, sometimes you just need to talk and lash out about the bad days that you had at work. So it's a good place to do that. And in some places, like your work, maybe it's not like a big company. So if it's not a corporate, you may not have, those opportunity or find another person or another minority, because if you're the only minority, well, So there's also outside groups. So anybody who wants to be part of the Brussels POC, you know what to do. Sorry. POC, people of color.
And I think what Andrea and Celine and I have said as well, I think that sort of highlights the importance of networks, and networks that are formal and networks that are informal. So in the case of Celine mentioned, it's the WhatsApp group. When I used to live in Brussels, I was also part of a WhatsApp group, and we'd also get together as well to talk about certain issues that we faced, as well as women who didn't look like the majority, women who were black. And I think you do need to use those in tandem. It's this issue of what's wider society, what's happening there, and also what corporations might be trying to do to change that. But the two must be in tandem, and I agree, it is extremely tricky, and more so if you're the only person of color in that organization, or the only underrepresented voice in that organization.
Speaking of allies and networks, how can communication professionals in private and public sectors find synergies in bringing about a more inclusive and less stereotypical communication?
Training. You need to train. You need to have training on it. You need to have, especially when it comes to journalists or they really need to train, because things that they come out with, and sometimes like the title, because it can be discriminatory. So training is my answer. Train, learn, talk to organization. As you know, we are here for that. So we are here to help.
Complètement d'accord avec ça.
I agree completely with that. I'd just like to add that the corporate culture aspect is extremely important as well. I have worked in different companies of different sizes, and when you work for a big multinational, if you are of a foreign nationality, it's totally normal. You don't stand out. But if you are in a small company and you're the only person with a non-Belgian surname, sometimes people think that you're a bit of an odd character. So once again, we have to work on this. At what level, though? Often, and I've seen this individually in many places, if you have a CEO open to diversity and inclusion, then there is a cascade. It's very fluid. However, if you have a CEO who is much more reluctant and resistant, then things don't change. So the culture in companies is also developing. Thank you.
Do we have more comments from the audience, suggestions, questions?
Just an idea that comes out listening to you. What if, when we conceive campaigns, because many of us in the room do run campaigns, we were to insert in the terms of reference cahier des charges, that testing the concept even before submitting the offer with focus groups that are representative of society. Would that be an idea? Would that be a solution? And including with a particular stress on people with a physical handicap, with a handicap that you cannot see, minorities, etc. Is this something that you would support?
Yes, absolutely. So a lot of problems, I'm starting with accessibility and then passing to focus groups. A lot of problems with accessibility is that most of us, if not all of us in the room, will use contractors at one point or another. There are already, if you work in new institutions, there are already in the regulations references to assurance of accessibility, if I'm not mistaken. So this is something really that should be in all of the terms of references. Especially for EU funds, let's say. But this is something that should be on all of the terms of references with contractor, that the campaign is accessible. But also I agree that it's inclusive and that it actually brings representation, persons that are part of the minorities to prove the concept, because it's not a checklist. It's everybody is different, and everybody obviously needs to be, we need to see ourselves in the communication. So it's not with a checklist that you have just a generic person of color or a generic person with disability, that you achieve through inclusion. So through focus groups would be much better indeed.
I'm just gonna say yes, yes, and yes.
Et pour ceux qui n'ont pas compris.
And for those who haven't understood, yes. Well, indeed, if you have a look at the documents that the UPA has recently published, that proposal is indeed part of the proposed solutions that we are implementing. That is to make sure that in the boards, as well as the marketing departments, that you have people representing this diversity, and diversity in the broadest sense of the term. If you can't do this, turn to focus groups to test the communication, to see how they're perceived. And once again, do not target your communication solely to minorities. Make sure that your message is understood by everyone. What we can add is that new technologies make things easier with targeted publicity. With that, we can also have different messages that can target different groups, and they can be tested. We can have live testing So all of those are proposed solutions in order to ensure that publicity reflects more accurately what society is actually like.
Do we have any more questions? Yes, Laura, please.
I'm Laura van Howard from WPP. I was just thinking about small things that make linkages between what you just said and what we said before. So I think from the communicator's curriculum to having these best practices in agencies and in communications teams, because I think it's always working hand in hand. There's small things that you can do, like sharing best practice on your profiles, on your LinkedIn, between different organizations and teams. I think doing more of that is definitely something that will inspire others. And then something that is a bit typical to agencies probably, but that I think institutions are also interested in is the awards. And there's a lot of communication awards that are delivered on whatever visuals, on effectiveness, so there might be something to think about also in terms of inclusive communication. And the last point I was thinking about is when we use visuals, when we don't create the visuals ourselves, we often go to databases. So is there a conversation to be had with people who own these databases to have visuals that are maybe a bit less stereotypical when we talk about inclusiveness? And can we mainstream other types of content in databases than the ones that we see now?
Yeah, I think database, especially on the picture front, is very crucial as well. You know, I think there are many companies out there that have realize the importance of making sure that their photos are inclusive, whether it's on the disability front, whether that's on people of color, whether it's to do with people who are from the LGBTIQ community, and any other represented voice for that matter as well. I think in terms of databases as well, I know for like the Brussels binder, that's something that's available to everybody. You don't have to pay to access any of those female experts on it. And I think that's really great because once again, you have a tool that removes that excuse that, oh, there aren't any women. In fact, you can find that there's a whole list of women as well. And like what we're doing on the corporate level in Bloomberg as well, we've got that database which our reporters can now use and to find those untapped voices as well to include in their reporting.
Sorry, last comment on especially stock photos database, because this is my pet peeve. It is not representative, and especially for visible disabilities, what happens a lot, I even had it in my speech, is that you notice or you are told that the persons in a wheelchair are models that they don't have a disability, and they just get put on a chair and on a wheelchair to pretend they are disabled. And this is offensive, first. And also, there are so many persons with disabilities, and there are so many discriminated minorities that are out of work, that are poor, that they need money. So if any stock photo manager is listening to me, like, get persons with disability, get persons from discriminated groups, pay them, and pay them well for the photos, so that I don't have to spend 2 hours searching for a photo of an actual person with disability. Thank you.
So time has come to an end. It's time to wrap up, and we actually have no time left. But I would just like to say that there were several conclusions that came up here, which is it's key to have participation. Speak to the people concerned, share good practices among you, find your allies, do your networking. Accessibility is useful for all of us. There are cheap and handy solutions that can improve situations. Ask the people with disabilities invited what reasonable accommodation they need to be able to take part. Address the problems that exist through participation. And then we had this excellent proposal of testing campaigns with focus groups that seem to get a good acceptance. And finally, you can't be what you can't see. So we need more people represented at all levels from discriminated minority groups. Now, thank you very much to everyone who participated, audience and speakers alike. At 1 o'clock, we have the closing session in this same room, but upstairs. So the room number 62, and there will also be free lunch catering afterwards that you're most invited to. Thank you.